Hi, my name is Ruth Grossman. I'm in the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders, and I also run the FACE Lab at Emerson College in Boston. The study I want to tell you about is called Perceptions of Self and Other, Social Judgments and Gaze Patterns to Videos of Adolescents with and Without Autism Spectrum Disorder. The study is built on the foundation that we form first impressions rather quickly. In any social situation, within a fraction of a second, we've made a determination about somebody's personality, about their intelligence, or about how trustworthy they are. And we know that this is true for individuals who are neurotypical, that is, adults who do not have a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder or any other type of developmental diagnosis. So we know that this is true when neurotypical adults, most of these studies are based on adults, look at other neurotypical adults. We also know that this is true when neurotypical adults look at people with autism. Unfortunately, in the last few years, we have been discovering that when neurotypical adults look at autistic individuals, they form first impressions that are rather negative. They perceive autistic individuals to be overall more socially awkward and to just not be as socially capable in many scenarios as their perceptions of neurotypical peers. But we don't know how autistic individuals themselves form these first impressions. We know that people with autism spectrum disorder have difficulty reading social cues of others, but we don't know how that affects their ability or their tendency to form these types of first impressions. We also don't know how this works for adolescents. And adolescence is one of those times in people's lives where social context and social situations, social demands become a lot more complicated and complex, and making and forming a good first impression actually becomes very, very important. So we were interested in finding out, how do autistic adolescents form these first impressions of their peers, and how are the impressions about them formed by their adolescent peers? So we were interested in looking at how adolescents look at neurotypical peers, how they look at autistic peers and form those first impressions, and also how participants who are neurotypical form those first impressions and how autistic adolescents form those first impressions. Another thing we wanted to know is whether people looked more at individuals who they formed positive impressions of, or whether they looked less at people for whom they had more negative first impressions. So what we did is bring a bunch of adolescent participants into the lab, and we showed them on a computer screen brief video clips of other adolescents just saying a sentence, roughly 2 to 3 seconds long. And half of these adolescents in the video clips were autistic, and half of them were neurotypical. And half of our participants were autistic, and the other half were neurotypical, but we never told the participants about the diagnosis of the people in the videos, or even that there was a diagnosis for some of them. And we asked them to give us their impression of the person in the video that they had just seen. We also recorded their gaze patterns to the screen to see whether they looked more or less at certain faces. And when we asked their impressions, we asked 2 questions about themselves. So what was your perception, and how willing are you to engage yourself, to extend yourself socially to this person who you just saw in the video? So would you like to sit together at lunch with this person? Would you like to start a conversation with this person? We also asked them 3 questions about the other person. So what are your perceptions of their social abilities and their social life? Do you think this person gets along well with others? Do you think this person is socially awkward? Do you think this person spends a lot of time alone? And what we found in our rating, so these are all data from the neurotypical peers, and when they looked at other neurotypical peers, which is the orange bars here, you can see that they really didn't think that the neurotypical kids spend a lot of time alone. They didn't think they were socially awkward. They thought they got along well with others. They didn't maybe want to start a conversation that badly with them, but they were willing to. They really didn't want to sit at lunch with somebody they didn't know. When they looked at autistic adolescents, they did make a differentiation. So even though they didn't think that adolescents who were autistic spent a lot of time by themselves, they thought they spent more time by themselves than the neurotypical kids did. They thought they were more socially awkward than the neurotypical kids. They didn't get along as well with others as neurotypical kids did. They really didn't want to start a conversation with them, and they really didn't want to sit at lunch with them. When we asked the same question of autistic participants, you can see that they rated the neurotypical adolescents pretty much sort of at 0. They were somewhat neutral about them, right? They probably, I don't know how much time they spent alone, kind of neutral, socially awkward, not really. They thought that the kids who were neurotypical in the videos got along well with others. They weren't all that thrilled about starting a conversation, and they weren't all that likely to have lunch with this person. However, when autistic participants rated autistic adolescents in the videos, they thought that they really did spend a lot of time alone, were quite socially awkward. They didn't believe that they got along as well with others as neurotypical kids did. They didn't want to start a conversation with them, and they didn't want to sit at lunch with them. We also found that the autistic individuals and the neurotypical individuals spend a lot less time looking at the faces of autistic kids. So for the kids for whom they gave lower first impression ratings, they also spend much less time looking at them. So in answer to our question of whether autistic adolescents can pick up on these social cues and form similar first impressions to their neurotypical peers, the answer is yes, they do pick up on these social cues. They differentiated between the adolescents in the video who were neurotypical and the adolescents who were autistic. But they also formed first impressions of autistic adolescents that were even more negative than the impressions formed by neurotypical adolescents. So what these data lead us to is to say that we really have to be thoughtful and careful about how we create social environments for adolescents where they can get to know each other rather than relying on first impressions. Because we now know that the first impressions formed of adolescents who are autistic, even by adolescents who are autistic themselves, are rather negative. So we really want to be mindful to create environments where there's more opportunity to get to know each other and to not let those first impressions persist.